Hi, I'm Jeff Mervis with Science. Once again, we're not able to give you the 2015 budget, but we're going to try our best to sort of fill in some of the details that Matt talked about based on what we already know and looking ahead. I've just got a couple of slides. This first one up here, sort of the headline echoes the theme that I want to emphasize, which is we're looking at the status quo if you can keep it, is, I think, where you should be putting things in context. So what I'm showing up here from the Congressional Budget Office, we are now at the two shortest bars. This is projected deficit. It's gone well below $1 trillion. It's now in the neighborhood of $500 billion. Only in Washington can you say only $500 billion. But anyway, that's where we are, 2014 and then 2015. But as you can see, those bars start to get longer. They're also projected. But you've come a long way, but you may be headed back to where we were. So that's the first point. The next point, if I can get to the next slide there. Yeah, okay, is what Matt emphasized, which is this is the number for non-defense discretionary spending. That's where all the science outside of DOD comes from. So all of your agencies, NSF, NIH, DOE, NASA, et cetera. And you'll see that those bars, this is not corrected for inflation, those bars don't do much over the next decade. So this is what everything has to fit within, unless, of course, Congress changes. Now, of course, that's also potentially good news. As we saw this year, Congress created sequester. Congress can revise sequester. Now, of course, the administration wants Congress to get rid of sequester. Whether that happens, of course, remains to be seen. But anyway, so those are just two sort of sets of trends to keep in mind. I wanted to run through what you should be thinking about and group it into the executive branch in Congress, and then within Congress, the Senate and the House, just very briefly. So what we're looking at here, we're in the midst of second-term blues. This is an administration that has probably rolled out everything new that it's going to roll out. So as the president said, he has the pen and the phone. What that means is he's not expecting Congress to do anything. What can he do? And for science and technology, that translates into what regulations do you care about? What is going to affect your discipline? What is going to affect your institution? What is going to affect the scientific community? So those are the things you should be thinking about, and Toby may talk more about those, but that's something that you'll probably want to talk to your members and staff about tomorrow. At the same time, we're in this limbo where there are delays in confirming several senior nominees. I won't go through the whole list. You're as familiar with them as I am, probably, starting with NSF. We have an acting director. We have a nominee, Franz Cordova. DOE Office of Science. We have 2 or 3 key appointments there. They're acting people. They're people nominated. ARPA-E. NOAA has had an acting director for a year. USGS, almost a year. What that means is not that the agency's not doing anything, but in terms of new initiatives, in terms of making decisions, you're much more likely to have a status quo, and you're much less likely to have the agencies work towards something new. So what that means, in part, is when we're waiting for the 2015 budget request, which, as Matt said, will come out next month, most people expect probably more of the same, but you never know. Just to take two examples, last year there were two initiatives that didn't really come from the agencies, but nevertheless they became administration priorities. One was the BRAIN initiative, which DARPA is playing a leading role, as well as NIH. And the second is the STEM education reorganization / fiasco, which the administration hatched very late in the game and went over very badly among all parties, Congress, the community as well. But what's important to keep in mind is neither of those came from the agencies. They came from the White House. They came through OMB. And that's, again, not ideal, but that's the way things work sometimes, and they're more likely to work that way as an administration winds down. Okay, now let's turn to Congress briefly. Matt talked about 2014, and I think the key message there was the physical science agencies really did pretty well. They got to near Senate levels, and as Matt said, even though overall they were supposed to split the difference, they got much closer to all rather than half the loaf. And that wasn't an accident. I think Senator Mikulski, Barbara Mikulski of Maryland, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, really was a force to be reckoned with, not only on funding, but as you may know, all of the offensive language that had been either in a House appropriation bills or in the previous appropriation were removed. The Coburn Amendment being a perfect example. I don't know if show of hands if people know what I'm talking about. Okay, this was language that pretty much prevented NSF from funding any political science research. It was in the 2013 appropriation, so it only applied to that year, but a lot of people were assuming it would continue. It did not. And even though it only applied to political science, there was a lot of concern that it was really aimed at a broader social science portfolio. And of course, once you do that, then what's to prevent picking any particular discipline? So that threat hasn't gone away, but it's not there in 2014, and it's not an accident. On the other hand, the NIH budget, as Matt had said, has been stagnant for years. There's no similar advocate to bump that up, and therefore, it's likely, given the tight constraints, that that's going to continue unless, anyone can figure out a way to change that situation. The Competes Act Reauthorization, I won't say much on because you're going to hear an excellent panel tomorrow that'll give you much more detail, but I'll just sort of set it up. I think the question is, will Chairman Smith, Lamar Smith, chair of the House Science, Space and Technology Committee, go it alone, or will he negotiate with the community and with the Democrats on a bill that really is the major reauthorization for non-defense agencies? They have so far split it into two bills. You'll hear talk about the FIRST Act and the Einstein Act. I won't go into the details, but it's an indication that they are slicing it differently than has been the case. The Democrats want to reauthorize the whole package, which was originally passed in 2007 as a path to doubling budgets, was reauthorized in 2010 after it became very partisan, and then it has now expired. 2013 was the year it was supposed to be renewed. Nothing much happens without in that lapse, but it is an indication that Congress is lagging in doing something that it had said it wanted to do. Okay, the last issue is the slew of retirements that are going to alter committee lineups. Again, I don't expect you to remember all these names, but I'm going to mention some of them because the point is you need to build a relationship with your delegation because you don't know when those people are going to move up the ladder and assume positions of leadership, and it's important that by the time they do, you've already have that relationship. So just quickly, if the Democrats lose control of the Senate, now lots of things can happen at a macro level, but looking at our micro level, there's going to be a lineup of new chairs that could make a big difference on their approach to science. Richard Shelby from Alabama. Anybody from Alabama here? All right. He's been ranking member for both full committee and CJS, which is Commerce, Justice, Science. But, you know, his record on research, I think, is at least open to question. Senator John Thune on Commerce, Science is the ranking member. Lamar Alexander from Tennessee. Anybody from Tennessee? Is ranking on HELP. That's the Health, Education, Labor Committee. And Lisa Murkowski on Energy and Natural Resources. Alaska? Anyone? Okay. Now that's if the Republicans take over. But even if the Democrats retain the majority, there are going to be changes. Jay Rockefeller is retiring, so that chairmanship is up for grabs. Bill Nelson is the most senior member from Florida. Has a strong support for space and research in general. Tom Harkin from Iowa is retiring. Patty Murray is likely to leave the Budget Committee for HELP. And Mary Landrieu, even if the Democrats control the Senate, needs to win her election this fall to keep the energy and natural resources. If not, Maria Cantwell could be in line for that, or there are several other dominoes. Again, I mention those names just so you can sort of give you a sense of how much fluidity there is, what is in play. In the House, you also have some significant retirements. Frank Wolf from Northern Virginia, longtime chair of CJS, and a very strong supporter of research and education, is retiring. The two people most senior behind him, John Culberson from Texas, any Texans, or Robert Alderholt from Alabama, are the two most likely candidates. Both of them would probably take quite a different approach on that committee. And George Miller and Henry Waxman on ed, workforce, and energy commerce, 40-year veterans, real stalwarts on a lot of the issues that you folks care about, including education. They are gone, and the question is, even if the Democrats remain in the minority, who will fill those shoes? And lastly, Mr. Smith himself is term limited as chair of the Science Committee. A year ago, he beat out Jim Sensenbrenner and Dana Rohrabacher, who I think you may hear from tomorrow. But presumably one or both of them would be interested in the chair once it becomes available again. So I will stop there. I hope that gives you a sense of, even though people feel that things are stagnant, there really is a lot of movement under the surface, which gets back to my original theme of the status quo may start to look pretty good next year this time, but you have an opportunity to do something about it. So last, before I turn it over to Toby, I just want to put in a plug. Bill Kelly sent out a note last week about a survey that Science magazine was doing on growth in engineering programs. Some of you have responded, but not nearly as many as we had hoped. So please take a look at your email. We are interested in what's going on in your program, and please let us know, fill that out, and send it back in. Thank you.
Come on. Escape. Got it. I have to do it. Where's the, oh.